Today we'll be exploring the 6 simple machines and how they make it easier to do work. We first need to start by defining what a simple machine is. In its most basic sense, a simple machine is something that makes it easier to do work by changing the direction and magnitude of force. We're going to get a little bit more into what this means, but first we're going to look at the formula that we use. So work is a measure of force times distance, but this means that force and distance are inversely related. So that being said, when force goes up, distance will go down. And if distance were to go up, force would go down. That also has something to do with the magnitude. So if force doubles, then distance will halve. So what does that mean for simple machines? Our first simple machine that we're going to look at is a pulley. So this is what our pulley looks like. And instead of simply lifting up a box straight up, the pulley makes our distance much longer. And when we make our distance much longer, our force decreases. So to do the same lifting would require a lot less force because it's being distributed along this wheel portion. This man is using a pulley. So usually to lift oneself off the ground, it requires quite a bit of upper body strength, but he just gives it a small push and he's on the ground. So not a lot of force was applied, but the same amount of work was done because it was spread over a much larger distance. Is the wheel and axle. So our axle is this middle portion right here. Now typically, this axle doesn't have a lot of rotational distance, but the wheel increases that, meaning that by turning this outside wheel, you're able to turn the axle much easier and lift up things. A common example of a wheel and axle is a steering wheel. So the race car driver is able to more easily turn this outside wheel as opposed to the axle, which is not very wide, and maneuver a race car at high speeds. A simple machine is the wedge. Now, a wedge looks a little bit like a wedge of cheese in a way. That being said, it has a long side that sits right about here and long sides as it goes through. And it's kind of like an inclined plane that's portable. And we'll look at that a little bit more later. So a knife is thin. It doesn't have these portions right here, these green portions. And a nail only works at a point. So it doesn't have this orange distance. But the wedge has both, meaning it's able to split objects much easier. Here a man is able to split wood with just a little bit of elevation and a small bit of force, and that wood just separates pretty easily. Next, we're going to be looking at the inclined plane. Now, if somebody were to go ahead and lift up the wheelbarrow straight up this distance, that's kind of what it would look like. But our inclined plane increases that distance as it works up the incline, meaning it requires a lot less force than simply lifting up our weight. Now, typically, a tractor like this, if it were to be put on the truck any other way, it'd have to be lifted by a crane. But it's able to be driven up the inclined plane much easier because the distance is being increased that it goes across, which requires a lot less force. Here we have the screw. Now, screws are kind of unique when you think about it, because unlike a nail, which is pretty straight, The screw has these little grooves in it, which go all around and increase the surface area. So it can kind of be thought of as an inclined plane wrapped around a cylinder. So it's spreading out the distance. So rather than just going this distance, it's going round and around and around and around. We can see an example of that. With a hammer, somebody would have to put a lot of force and whack it in with a heavy piece of metal. But with the screw, he's able to just easily twist, and the screw goes right into the wood. Lastly, we have a lever. A common way that people think of this is a seesaw or something like that, but with just a little bit of downward force, this box can be lifted up. It hinges upon this portion, which is called the fulcrum, and that's kind of the point in which it tilts around. A better example of this is these two acrobats. A little bit of downward force sends the other acrobat flying. Thank you very much. I hope you learned a little bit more about simple machines.